All right, so let's get cranking. The feet, we're going to have to finish up with the arch of the foot. We're going to deal with the intrinsic muscles, the tiny little ones that are embedded within your feet that none of you know how to use. And chat a little bit about the venous plantar pump, which is kind of a mechanism by which we have the ability to circulate blood back up to our heart just by the process of walking. And then we'll do windlass mechanism, which really kind of finishes off that conversation of how the arch transfers from a shock absorber into that rigid lever that gives us propulsion. And then we're going to touch on dermatomes and myotomes, which is the innervations that kind of track down. So there's a few things to cover, which will unload us a little bit later. So, ankle, quick review. What type of joint?
Hinge.
Hinge, good. What's the range of motion?
0 to 24.
0 to 24 dorsiflexion, and what's the other motion?
0 to 50.
0 to 50 for plantar flexion. Michelle, how many degrees of freedom for the ankle? 2. Brilliant. So what's if plantar flexion, dorsiflexion is the first, what is the other? Inversion and eversion. Awesome. John, range of motion, inversion and eversion.
5 degrees eversion, 20 in.
We'll go 30 in, 30 inversion. Yep. Okay. So which joint specifically is providing us with the hinge, the plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, Justice? The mortise, yeah. So it's that seating of the tibia and the fibula on top of that talus that creates that movement for the hinge joint. Stop with it. Which joint is giving us that inversion eversion? The subtalar joint. So it's that talus sitting on top of that calcaneus that lets us have that rotation. Good. Alexander, what plane of motion is a dorsiflexion, plantar flexion?
Sagittal.
So that sagittal plane, so that flexion extension kind of motion is sagittal plane. Good. So drill yourself. We can have that conversation. Again, start at that osteo level and pick it apart, and then move into the ligaments. So how do we stabilize this thing? So inversion, eversion. What are our stability pieces? So we go inversion, that's stressing the lateral ankle. So what ligaments stabilize the lateral ankle? So give yourself that heads up and go, okay, so how many are we looking for?
1, 3.
3. Lateral ankle, we have three ligaments that we're looking for. So ATFL is the first, anterior talofibular. Where's the second? So that's my third. PTFL is in the back. What's in the middle? Calcaneofibular. Now, as you quiz yourself in the process of me staring at you and you're hoping and praying I don't call on you, then stay away from your nose, right? Task yourself with trying to remember. The way you tell your brain what to remember is by struggling with pulling that information out. It's extracting it. You do not need to familiarize yourself with notes on a page. You need to produce the knowledge. You need to force yourself to remember it, okay? It's okay to not know an answer. Yes, you get put on the spot. It's okay to have that happen. But that reinforces that awkwardness, that hate of that social situation, reinforces that you're going to hold on to that piece. So ATF, CF, PTF, anterior talofibular, calcaneofibular, posterior talofibular. If I go into dorsiflexion with inversion, which of those ligaments is stressed? Sabrina. Dorsiflexion with inversion. Which of those ligaments get stressed? We're going to go posterior talofibular. So if we go dorsiflexion, so we go like we're going back pedal, we fall in the hole. We go dorsiflexion and then inversion. That's how we get the one in the back. If we go pure inversion with no plantar dorsiflexion, that's calcaneofibular. And the more common is how do we hurt that anterior talofibular? How do we get that? How do we get our normal ankle sprain? What is the motion combination that gives us that? What does it restrict? What does the ATF restrict?
Dorsiflexion, external. Eversion.
So anterior talofibular is still inversion. So it's plantar flexion with inversion. It's stepping off a curve. It's landing on somebody's foot and going over it. Right? So what is eversion then? So that foot turns out, everts out, pulls out. And what ligament structure? How many are we looking for? How many ligaments? We have that one grouping of the deltoid. So that's easier.
So you don't try to break them down.
I'm not breaking them down. You want to go PT school, they'll help you break them down for you. They'll break you down in the process. With love. Good? So, 3 ligaments on the lateral ankle. ACF, CF, PCF. That's plantar flexion with inversion. It's pure inversion. It is dorsiflexion with inversion. And then deltoid we just associate with eversion. Good?
Plantar flexion with inversion, dorsiflexion with inversion.
So plantar flexion with inversion, pure inversion,
Pure
and then dorsiflexion with inversion is stabilizing against inversion on the lateral ankle. What is a syndesmosis? So we have this interosseous membrane. What is it stabilizing? Long bones, right? So yes, tibia and fibula in this instance because we're talking lower leg. We're also going to have that in the forearm. So syndesmosis is that banding that holds long bones together, parallel bones together. Good. So how is that reinforced at the ankle mortise? What ligaments reinforce the syndesmosis for the ankle mortise? The anterior and posterior tibiofibular, right? So it's just a connection of the names of the bones, which isn't the hard part. Just remembering that it's there. How do we hurt that? We isolate that. What does it do? What does the anterior tib fib and the posterior tib fib ligaments do? Support a hallux. What support are they resisting against? And your body weight going through the tibia shaft is going to help that. It's the separation of those two bones. So the support's by banding them together. Right? Hopefully not bungee because they shouldn't stretch. But yes, they're strapping them together, okay?
Fully extended.
Fully extended bungee. All right, so they're banding them together. So we hurt them when we get leverage to kind of dorsiflex with eversion to peel that thing apart, to grab it, up and out, which is your high ankle sprain. Okay. So I think associating it again, I'm not going to sit here and pick apart injuries on an exam, but I am going to ask you what those resistance, what they're helping resist against, what they help support, how they're working. Okay. All right, there's this spider web stuff all over on the top of your ankle. What is that? Retinaculum. Well, how many do we have? 5 in that lower leg. So we need is okay. So spider webs here. What is the function of a retinaculum?
The whole ligament down towards the
Oh, what now?
whole ligament.
Oh, what now?
Tendon.
Tendons down? Good. So we've got this bowstring where I have these tendons that are stretching from their origin, the muscles hit, and their distal tendons cross a joint. And when we cross that joint, we've got to prevent them from popping up. We don't want them taking the shortcut. We want them taking that entire long route. We need the leverage. So they're going to be like a watch band. It's going to hold it down in place so it doesn't pop up and maintains that line of pull. What do we know is going to exist on those tendons underneath those retinaculums? Synovial sheath, right? This coverage, this outside lining. Because we need that protection so it's not getting bound up and caught. But again, that adds in the possibility. Of some other unique injuries within that. Because if we get that inflammation, which is just chemicals tied up in that space, it's just going to hurt. So we got to find a way to work that out. A little bit different approaches for the tendinosynovitis from just the tendinotomy. Okay, so which one is this? Superior what? Extensor retinacular, right? So if we have a superior, we have an inferior. All right, on the medial side, what do we have?
Flexor.
Flexor retinaculum sitting in the back from the lateral, from the tibia down to the calcaneus. Good. So what passageway does the flexor retinaculum create? The tarsal tunnel. Okay? What travels through the tarsal tunnel?
Tibial nerve and artery.
Tibial nerve, posterior tibial artery, and it's a retinaculum, so what's it holding down? Tendons. What tendons? Who should I ask?
Bicep. The
Tom,
Tom,
Dick, and Harry.
Yeah.
Which compartment did Tom, Dick, and Harry come from?
Deep posterior.
Deep posterior.
Interior teeth.
Lateral side, we have two more retinaculums. What are they? Superior, inferior, fibular, perineal. Don't let perineal throw you off, because I just figured that all the time. Good. And what tendons do they hold down? The lateral compartment. And what's in the lateral compartment? Fibularis, longus, and brevis. There is a third fibularis. Where does it exist? What is it? Tertius, the third, and it's in the anterior compartment. What else is in the anterior compartment? Tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis longus, and extensor digitorum longus. Feeling okay with it? No?
Well, you just did it, I heard you.
All right, I'm a big fan of the sinus tarsi. Why do I like the sinus tarsi? It's a great landmark for finding what structures. So bifurcate is one of them. So bifurcate gets into another conversation of stabilizing that midfoot. Right? So if we go distal, if we go down the foot away from the ankle, then we're going to find that bifurcate sitting up underneath that spiderweb on the line.
Then you can also set feel the ATS.
So if we go and find sinus tarsi, that little hole gaping right there, and we go distal, then we're going to find sinus bifurcate there. If we go up proximal, the first thing we're going to find is ATF, the anterior talofibular. And if we go behind posteriorly, then we're going to find calcaneofibular, CF. So it's a good way to find two of the three lateral stabilizers. And then if we come in, we will also find that bifurcate getting into the front of the foot, getting into that midfoot. When do we typically have to concern ourselves with the bifurcate sprain? Under what circumstances do we tend to see that midfoot damage? When we brace for an ankle sprain without doing the rehab to give them that neuromuscular control. So we're going to put that midfoot more at risk if we don't help that individual regain that personal control rather than relying on a static brace. Okay? Awesome. Medial longitudinal arch. Medial longitudinal arch. Calcaneus. Valus. Clavicular. Medial cuneiform. First metatarsal and your phalanges. So we have this lovely little banding on arch, right? That is an awesome shock absorber when you put weight on your foot. It stretches out a little bit. It bows out a little bit. And that's statically stabilized by how many ligaments, how many structures? 4. What are those 4 structures? Plantar fascia, the plantar aponeurosis. Short and long plantar ligaments. And spring ligament. What's the landmark to find and palpate the spring ligament? How do you find it? Sustentaculum tali. Funky, happy, lovely word. What bone is the sustentaculum tali on? Calcaneus. Even though it says tali, it's only calcaneus. It's just trying to throw you a little bit.
It articulates with the talus.
So from that point, so you're going to go find medial malleolus, drop about a thumb's width down, put your finger on that joint line, and just below is that bony ridge knot. That's sustentaculum tali. So medial malleolus, come thumb width down, and boom, we're going to find sustentaculum tali right down in here. And so as we go, we're going to get my spring ligament sticking right up in there, coming forward into that navicular. Good, short and long planters sit way underneath. And then we got this lovely band through here, which is our plantar fascia, plantar aponeurosis. So 4 static stabilizers. Okay, so this plantar aponeurosis has a little give to it. It's collagen fibers. It's not it's quite as rigid as say a pure ligament. Also notice that it's enveloped and wrapped to the end. It goes up into that proximal phalanx, that proximal phalange. So the way this works is that when you step and then you load that body weight, that archway, it takes that and absorbs some of it. Some of it's more than others. Normal arch. They have a flat foot where there isn't much arch. We call that pes planus. They have a super high arch, which tends to be fairly rigid. We call it pes cavus, like a cave underneath their foot. And there's some individuals that we have a supple pes planus, which is a soft pes planus. So when I'm unloaded, I look like I have this lovely arch, and as soon as I put weight down, it goes away. Okay? The keystone of that arch is this navicular. So most of those eval tests you're going to look at are going to be based upon this position of the navicular in relation to other landmarks. So navicular is that keystone that holds it up, and we're looking at that dropping in that causes some torque issues. Anyway, so you have this absorption when your body loads it, and then as you move into that propulsion phase, you lift your heel. Stand up for a second and feel it. What does it feel like? What else happens when you lift your heel? What other happens? What else happens when you lift that heel? What has to happen to allow that heel to lift? Your calves have to fire some. They have to lift up and pull. Good. So calves are going to trigger. So we're going into plantar flexion to kind of lift that foot up. What else? They hold the weight? Sort of, yeah. I mean, where is it pushing? Where are you feeling that pressure now? When you lift that heel off, where do you feel that pressure? The ball of your feet. So what's going on at that joint?
The toes are spreading apart, and then the ligaments and muscles between them are causing a tension. Opposition of forces to distribute it to the ground.
Somewhat. I mean, a lot of it goes through the bones themselves to take that load. They are going to splay out, provided you're not wearing shoes that restrict them in. You're going to extend that big toe. I mean, all of your toes, but especially that big toe. So just run that through here. Is that if you've got plantar fascia running along that line, and then we go and rotate and extend that big toe, you're torquing, you're grabbing the end of that plantar fascia and pulling it as you rotate it away. It's like you're winding it on a spool and pulling it up as you go. So you're adding tension to the plantar fascia, the plantar aponeurosis, as you go into extension, because you're basically ratcheting that tissue at its end up and around. Does that make sense? So that's how we're taking this mostly taut band that can stretch a little, but then we're cranking on this tensioning to it by wrapping it around the end and dialing it up. And by doing that, we make this completely rigid. We compress this entire thing together. We put a tension through that to the point that all of these become a rigid lever. And now we can put pressure in to change that torque and that force, to drive it through the bones. Where it goes from being an absorbable arch into a rigid lever that we can push off of and get propulsion. So it has this really cool, I'm chill, but I'm strict. I'm like I can handle that absorption, and then I can immediately turn rigid when necessary to allow, within a fraction of a second, to be able to provide transition from weight loading to propulsion. So that's called your windlass mechanism. WINDLASS. And if you actually go look up windlass to define that term, it's a nautical term for tensioning a rope. Because that's what you're doing. You're ratcheting that big toe in extension, which pulls the distal end and allows for change from supple to rigid.
So what would you say is a more compact definition? Just the ability of the plantar aponeurosis to go from supple to rigid to create
I wouldn't say the ability, I would say the process of.
process.
The process of tensioning that plantar aponeurosis to create a rigid lever. So where do we have issues? If we have somebody who has a collapsed arch or a flat foot, then if it's already down and on the floor, then we don't really have that shock absorption. And a lot of times, to adjust that, to compensate for that, we then go, so take a shoe, and when they hit the ground, you come, but instead of, as they collapse in to get leverage, they're going to push up off of their fourth and fifth digits. So give me somebody who pronates a lot, and you're going to see a torque in their foot because they're pushing off the lateral side rather than over the top. We can't ratchet if we don't extend that big toe. Likewise, if we have some kind of disease state or injury state that minimizes the motion, the extension of the big toe, we can't ratchet and we're going to have problems with propulsion. So that big toe becomes essential at normal walking gait, which is quality of life, which is getting around.
That's why turf toe hurts.
Absolutely.
I didn't realize, like, whenever growing up playing football, playing turf toe, I was like, really turf toe, and then I got it doing what I do.
Because your football player has a problem with his toe.
Yeah.
No, it's awful.
Oh, yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because it impacts every step. Most creepy song ever. Listen to the lyrics, it's like the #1 stalker song ever.
I don't know, even Maroon 5's got to be now.
What's that?
Like, no, with Animal.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, so where do we have issues? Certainly if that arch isn't properly supported. And that support, again, comes from a dynamic stability as much as it does that static. So we have those 4 structures, the plantar fascia, the long plantar, short plantar, spring ligaments, that all kind of stabilize this thing like ropes. Then we have those series of 4 muscles plus that grouping of intrinsic. So those 5 structures that are 5 groups that are helping to dynamically control. And if they're not doing their job, it's going to overload the static more. And imagine how much pressure you're putting into that plantar fascia. When you do that, when you extend that big toe and it's trying to take and make rigid that entire bow of that archway to push off of. And now it's this fan shape of distal attachment across the metatarsal head. But it comes into pretty much a singular point at the calcaneus. So all of that force is directed to the proximal attachment site. So what happens if you decide, I think I'm going to go train for a half marathon, and you've never run more than 3 miles in your life? It's going to be a problem. You overload your system, and your body gets sore. Little micro traumas. You pick at a little bit, you cause a little bit of injury. But your training plan says you got to do the 5 miles tomorrow. So you go out and do it because your training plan says to. It's a little sore, you work through it. And the next morning, it's a little stiff to wake up and step on it because that first step is starting to grab on those little microtraumas and dig at it and spread it out when you load that foot. And then put a tremendous tension in it when you go to pick that heel up and that windlass cranks on. Now you're pulling at something that's trying to repair. And every day it gets worse and worse. And every time you run, it becomes more and more miserable. You just create a plantar fasciopathy, plantar fasciitis. Microtraumas, subtle little damages and subtle little tears have come to the point that you have a tear forming in your plantar fascia. And it's this chronicity over time, it just keeps getting worse. And you're like, it'll be fine, I'll roll it out, it'll be okay, I'll deal with it. Except every step you take is another injury to it. It's another aggravation to it. The average person suffers with plantar fasciitis for 13 months. 13 months. It's a year and a month. Sucks. So then they can go in and have surgery. If you want to go chat with somebody about that, go just chat with Dr. Spars because she's got her foot all wrapped up right now. Because they'll go in and they'll release it from the side. They'll cut it to release it to where you're taking that piece of pressure off, which is going to inherently affect the biomechanics of that movement.
But does the fascia go back? Does it?
Can it if I'm still loading it the same way? So put it in the context of how do we heal these things? And I need to have intact tissue. Or I need to unload that stress so it can heal. So why does it hurt for first steps in the morning so bad? Because your silly butt's finally stopping. You're not loaded. And your body's like, woo, I can heal. So for 8 straight hours, your body's like, sweet, lay down some collagen, let's get some scabbing going on, let's get this thing fixed. And then you wake up because an alarm kicks off and you got to get up and go to work that day. And your body's like, oh, good gravy. And you just rip that scab apart. The first 5 minutes of every morning is like driving a knife into an open wound because you're driving a knife, you're stretching and ripping apart that scab until it loosens. And then you can kind of get around for most of the day. And then by the end of the day, it's fatiguing because you keep tearing it more.
I got real bad when I was pregnant. All the extra line in the babies, just that extra weight, constant, yeah.
So mitigating this, managing this is a problem, but understanding the tensions and the stresses that go into it is very, very important. Okay? So that windlass mechanism, absolutely something we need to pay attention to. Just like the screw home and snow windlass mechanism, right? All right. From there, we have, let's have to dig that off. You don't need it. I'll put that on. Intrinsic muscles in the feet. So intrinsic means that these are muscles that are just within that tiny little space. They don't cross out over the ankle. So we're all the longest muscles we have these brevis. Okay. So we're going to touch on these in 4 layers. So we're going to kind of go layer by layer through dissection in the foot. First layer, you have flexor digitorum brevis.
Do we need to stress origin and insertion on these?
No, I push layer 2 just because it's fun.
That's his favorite.
It's my favorite.
So
Because for the most part, I mean, they're coming off the calcaneus. If we look at how we talked about the dynamic stability of that arch, the intrinsics get lumped because they're going from one end to the other end and pulling together. So I don't really hammer too much because that's really their points of attachment. So I'll leave it there. Most of these are originating up on that calcaneus and coming in. There's some little guys in here, but you start looking at lumbricals and they're just puns. Quadratus plantae is unique as well because just like the lumbricals, it's having a midpoint that's into that tendon. So we'll get that. So the short answer is, I mean, flexor digitorum brevis. It's going to the distal phalanx. It's flexing the toes. It's originating on the calf hands. But I'm not going to sit there and ask for this one. All right, so next one. Abductor hallucis, abductor hallucis. So it's grabbing that big toe and pulling it away from the midline. What's the midline? Again, when we get to the foot and we get to the hand, the midline is no longer the midline of the body. It's the midline of that structure of the foot. So the midline is second ray, second metatarsal. So it is the middle right through that second ray coming on down. Good. So abductor is taking the big toe away from the second toe. Third one in this section, abductor digiti minimi. And it pulls a little toe away from that second ray. And since it's in front of us and kind of skulking around, we have that metatarsal bursa that sits lovingly under the balls of the feet. Off now, so he's gone. So abductor hallucis, flexor digiti minimi, abductor digiti minimi, and they're all disappeared.
Yeah, Lucas.
Abductor.
All
right. So second layer is fun for me. So second layer, if you can look at flexor digitorum longus as it comes through, it is kind of that central crux in between it all. It runs right through that second layer. So we only have two muscles, or one muscle and a group of muscles. The first is quadratus plantae. So there's a quadrate, so it's a kind of rectangular shaped quadrilateral. You'll hear that quadratus a few times throughout the body. This is the first of them. So quadratus plantae. It's actually going again from that calcaneus coming up, but it inserts into flexor digitorum longus. That's kind of cool. So we have a tendon, we have a muscle, flexor digitorum longus, that's sole job in life is to flex the toes. But we have this other entire muscle that's grabbing onto the tendon to assist that pull. It's just fun. It's just unique. Coming off on the other side, so there's quadratus plantae, are lumbricals. So coming off of that flexor digitorum longus tendon is another group of muscles.
Bless you.
Knock some of this. They're coming up across the metatarsal phalangeal joint. So they're crossing the balls, so they flex the MTP, the metatarsal phalangeal joint. So they're not going to the distal toes, they're not flexing the toes, they're flexing the whole toe down by grabbing that proximal piece. The lumbricals, what?
Reflex the what now?
The metatarsal phalange, the ball of the foot. So it flexes the ball of the foot, but not the inner phalangeal joints, not inside the toes, just the base of the toes. So the foot version is this, right? So it's allowing for that bend here, the knuckles.
The other ones.
And then the other one, the digitorum brevis is doing those. Now, lumbricals is a funky word, so again, I look it up because it just entertained me to see what was somebody thinking when they named this. Lumbricals means worms in Latin. So whoever did it decided they look like worms. I'm like, cool, I like it. Makes me like it even more. All right, so that second layer, we're going to grab all that and kick it all out of the way. And then we have a few other fun things. Those in there. So we're going to start on this side. Flexor digiti minimi brevis. We have flexor digitorum longus, and now we have flexor digiti minimi brevis. Have fun. Thank you. See you.
flexor digiti mini brevis?
Really depends on the resource, because there's a flexor digiti longus, flexor digitorum longus, and there's a flexor digiti minimi. The brevis is kind of depends on the resource you're looking at. All right, so we can flex the little toe. We then have an adductor hallucis. So we can adduct the big toe back towards that second rib. And it's got two parts, two heads. There's a transverse and oblique, one that goes sideways, one that goes diagonal.
So do you group that as one muscle or are you gonna?
It's one muscle, but just, yeah, there's two heads to it. It pulls a lot, it pulls back, it pulls the other direction, right. And then we have flexor hallucis brevis. Now, flexor hallucis brevis is worth having a couple moments of conversation about. So again, it's grabbing across the metatarsal phalangeal joint. So it's flexing the big toe down, but not by grabbing the distal end. And if I go and I resect it and I pull it off, then you'll see that there's these two little eggs that are left underneath it, inside of it. So there's two sesamoid bones. So a sesamoid is a free-floating bone. Free-floating in the sense that it's not banded to other bones by ligament. It's bound within, usually, a tendon sheath. That's why it's called floating, because it'll move. So the point here is that if I stand up and I put pressure, if I go heel off the ground to try to begin pushing forward, if I'm activating that windlass mechanism, I'm taking my entire body weight and driving it through one foot, principally through two joints, the first and the second ray mostly, to then propel myself forward. To do that, I really need flexor hallucis longus to push down on my big toe to give me that propulsion. So I'm asking a tendon to function, at the same time I am crushing that tendon.
You said flexor hallucis longus. Did you mean brevis? That's what we're talking about?
So
Or are we talking
longus gives me the strength and the power to flex the big toe. So brevis is there and it helps grab the metatarsal phalangeal. It grabs the proximal joint.
Yeah.
Longus is going to the tip of the toe, which gives me leverage to push through that toe when I walk. But the part about brevis is that by having these two sesamoids there, my weight goes into the sesamoids, which keeps the weight off of the longus tendon. So what you need to know about the brevis is that the brevis, it's carrying those sesamoids in it. So in some ways, it kind of sacrifices itself by holding on to these two sesamoids so that the longus can do its job unimpeded, running in between those two small bones. Flexor hallucis longus runs in between the sesamoids that are embedded inside of flexor hallucis brevis.
Would you say if brevis has two heads?
The muscle itself doesn't, but its distal insertion will work, so the tendon will. So, I mean, so I guess it kind of splits to allow the tendon to slide through, going away.
So they're not underneath the muscle, they're embedded within.
They're embedded within that tendon, yeah. So, layer one, three muscles. We have abductor hallucis, we have flexor digitorum brevis, we have abductor digiti minimi. So we can abduct the big toe, abduct the little toe, and we can flex the toe. So it's short. We get rid of those three, and we have quadratus plantae, which goes into flexor digitorum longus, and we have lumbricals coming off of it moving forward. So it's going to assist the flexion of the toes, and then lumbricals are going to flex that metatarsal phalangeal joint. Get rid of that set. Deep to that, we have flexor digiti minimi, so we can flex the pinky toe by itself. We have adductor hallucis, adductor to pull it across. There's two different lines of pull, two different heads that create that. And we have flexor hallucis brevis, which is cool because it's got the sesamoids embedded within it.
In the second layer, you said, wait, so quadratus plantae and lumbricals.
Yep.
And flexor digitorum longus, right?
Well, okay, so so longus is clearly not an intrinsic. It's the tendon that runs through.
So there's only two muscles.
So there's two muscles. But that flexor digitorum longus tendon is an origin and an insertion for that.
So it's like quadratus and lumbricus.
Quadratus plantae and lumbricus. So we keep digging, we're going to pull that back off. Lumbricals are gone. There's my abductor hallucis. There's my flexor digitorum. Think about the research again. There's a little dude here called the opponents. We'll talk about opponents when we get to the hand a lot more. Today we're just going to ignore that. They're gonna, there's my adductor. There's my other adductor. There's flexor hallucis brevis. And that leaves us. All right, so what is this structure right here? There's this oblique band that runs diagonal through here. What is that? Fibularis longus. As it reaches across, it grabs onto medial cuneiform and first metatarsal. Very cool stuff. Very deep within there. All right, so the fourth, the deepest layer. Pad, P-A-D, and dab, D-A-B. Pad, P-A-D, dab, D-A-B. Exactly. Thank you for that, John. All right, pad and dab. P is plantar interossei. Interossei means in between the bones on the plantar side. So pad, P-A-D, plantar, adduct, adduct. Plantar interossei, adduct. Dab, dorsal interossei. Dab, dorsal interossei, abduct. Pad and dab, plantar and dorsal. You will see so much of this again when we get to the hand because the hand is very, very similar to the foot. Right? So pad and dab will make a deep layer appearance again. It'll be the same kind of conversation. So it's worth having a comment though. How many of each do we have? So plantar interossei, pad, adduct. They add it back to the midline. The midline's the second toe. So how many plantar interossei are there?
4.
There's 3.
3.
I was thinking about the hand.
So in the foot, how many plantar interossei? How many toes do we need to adduct back to the midline?
8.
It comes across as a trick question because it's going to be 3 is the answer. So the second toe doesn't have any because it is the midline. So we can't adduct it back to itself. So it is the midline. So it doesn't get any pads. Third, fourth, and fifth toes all get one because they can adduct it back in. What about the first toe? Why does the hallux not have a pad? Because it has an adductor hallucis. It has the two heads, diagonal full and transverse, oblique and transverse that pull it back. So it's got its own dedicated muscle. Cool? All right, so what about dabs? Dorsal interossei, abduct. Big toe, first layer, hallux, abductor hallucis, abductor hallucis. So it's got its own to pull it out. First layer, little toe, abductor digiti minimi. It has its own to pull it out. So those don't get one. Why do I have 4 if I only have 3 toes left? So there's 2 on the second row. Second ray can abduct either away from the midline. So it gets 2. So the second ray here, you can grab that toe either direction and pull it to the side. So it gets 2 dorsal, 2 dabs. And then we have third and fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So usually something last class regarding like, because we wear shoes our whole lives, like our foot muscles are less active than other people's. Because like when I think about this, I think about like trying to consciously move my feet, and I'm like, I can't do half the shit that you're saying that we should be able to do. Like when I think about it.
So it's playtime, right? All right.
Oh,
So
this is the one where you make us, yeah.
yes. Okay. So class demo time. Take your shoe off. Preferably a sock teacher that you look at your feet. But if you're not want to show toes, that's fine. So take your shoe off. Now I want you to lower your chair all the way down. So your foot is, I want your foot flat on the floor. It is easiest. I know. I gotta play with feet. All right, yeah, we have dumb feet.
I don't like you.
We are grossly dysfunctional in how we move our feet. So how many muscles have we talked about? We have first layer, we have 3 muscles. Second layer, we have quadratus plantae plus 4 lumbricals. Right? Get next row, we have flexor digiti minimi, flexor hallucis, and then we have adductor hallucis. So that's 11. Then we go pad and dab, 3 and 4, and we have 7 more. So that is 18 intrinsic muscles in your feet. Good. Now, we have a lot that's dedicated to the big toe and the pinky toe uniquely from the rest. Which means, put your foot on the floor, non-weight bearing, and you should be able to put big toe down, pinky toe down, and extend the middle 3.
Yeah, I can't see that's what I'm talking about. Like I can't functionally do what you're doing.
I can feel it.
So it is possible. This is a technique called short feet. It is teaching you, because when you activate it that way, because you're activating, especially along that hallux, you are dynamically controlling that arch. To do that is to create that arch dynamic.
We did it. Yay!
So it's connecting thought to muscle. It's in there, and you have the positive. It's just a matter of teaching yourself to do it. Now, if you can do it, the next piece is to stand up and do it again.
It's easier standing.
Did it.
And if you can do that and hold that, then do single leg balance while holding short feet. So you remove some of your points of contact. So again, if we're talking about things like plantar fasciitis, plantar fascia problems, we're talking about people that don't have the dynamic control to stabilize and make the arch function. So part of this conversation needs to be on activating some of the 18 muscles in your feet. If you really want to have fun this summer, if you're going to the beach, like when you're done with me, so you go to the beach and you go for a jog. Go run a mile on the beach barefoot.
Oh yeah.
It is amazing, but your feet are sore for like the next 2 days. Why are they sore? Because you have to make them work with leverage in the soft sand. And so it's those 18 muscles where I'm like, holy good God, what are you doing to me? It's amazing.
Is track after practice with your pull down?
Yeah.
Take your shoes off.
All right. Oh, we lost one. I'll catch you back up. All right, so on the top of the foot, we have a couple more muscles. That's it. Forget about. We have extensor hallucis brevis, extensor digitorum brevis. Since you have your sock off, you can actually look at your foot, on the top of your foot, extend your toes, and you should see that muscle belly of extensor digitorum firing.
Wait, is this a part of pad dab?
No, this is top of the foot extensors. So it's intrinsics, but extensors. So we have first, it's our anterior compartment is extensor digitorum longus. If there's a longus, there's a brevis. Extensor hallucis longus. If there's a longus, there's a brevis. Here's your brevi. Extensor digitorum brevis. Extensor hallucis brevis.
So the longest are in the anterior, but these are more like.
So they're anterior. They're top of the foot. Right.
So we just say they're on the dorsal side and not really like.
So,
Because it's
yeah,
not
but,
part of the
but
anterior.
the anterior posterior compartments are the extrinsic muscles. He's talking about the intrinsic ones, which are just the, yeah. Right?
So it's only two of them or three?
Well, so there's
two muscles.
One.
yeah, your little toe doesn't get one. Your extensor digitorum brevis is just 2, 3, and 4.
That's it.
That's it. Your little toe doesn't get its own little extension. Yeah, that's the brevi of the. So Sabrina, there's 2 more intrinsics that are on top of the foot. So where in the anterior compartment we had extensor digitorum longus and extensor hallucis longus, it's the brevis versions of those that are sitting on top of the foot. So extensor digitorum brevis, extensor hallucis brevis.
Do you need origin insertion?
No. All right, take a break.
Okay.
Okay. We are going to change systems. Let's go in and grab. Let's do this one first. Cardiovascular. How do arteries work?
The heart pumps, pressure increases, it gets pushed through the body. And
So we have this pressure, we have a pump that creates or that drives a pressure mechanism and that pushes it through. What is the pressure that we expect to have in the arterial system?
Your blood pressure?
Your blood pressure. Brilliant. So what is it going to be? What's normal blood pressure?
120.
120/80. How do you figure out the average pressure of that? What's the mean arterial pressure? How do you figure that out?
Oh, God.
Average means add stuff together and divide, right? But you don't get to do that with this quite as easily. Because which are we in, systolic or diastolic more? Diastolic, we're arrest more. So we're heavier weighted towards that 80 than we are towards that 120. So a normal is 92, 93 millimeters of mercury. So your system, that arterial system, has a constant load on it. So we start chatting all kinds of fun, happy pathology stuff about hypertension and blah, blah, blah. You'll get that pathology in pharmacology. Okay. What's the pressure in your venous system?
Well, it's much lower, isn't it like 30, your math is like 30? Or
It's like, yeah, we used to have like 10. Like, there isn't a pump anymore. Like once we take the arterial system and get into the capillaries, that pressure pushes it to where it filters out, and then you're going to reabsorb it into the venous system in those capillaries. And then, so if it's only like 10 millimeters of mercury pressure in your venous system, how does it work? What brings the blood back up to the heart if there's not a pump that's functioning to do that really for us? What creates that system?
muscle activation.
It's muscle activation. So what's unique about veins that's different from arteries? Well, there's a couple of ways to go with that. So what is it about it? What is a principal structure within a vein that doesn't exist within an artery? What exists in a vein that doesn't exist in an artery?
We were talking about oxygenated versus deoxygenated.
Nope.
Oh, are you talking about the one-way valves?
The one-way valves. Yeah. So there are valves in your veins. So that way when your muscle contracts and it squishes the blood up, it can't go back down. So once the muscle constricts and it squishes that vein, then it drives the blood one way and it can't fall back down. So it helps us kind of piecemeal get it back up and into the system back up to the heart. Okay?
When those valves go to work, bicausis.
So we get varicose.
Varicose. There we
Varicose
go.
veins, we start getting dysfunction within those valves and they're not working right. Okay, so there's another mechanism that kind of helps this on the distal end. And it's called the venous plantar pump. Let me kick off that. You're going to see this little pathway in here. Let me send you all of it. Come in and grab that one, and that one, and that one. That one, all these little guys. When you bear weight, and that arch stretches out, and then when you go and put even more load into it, and you pick that heel up, and it further stretches, and it loads it. The act of walking is taking a tube and stretching it. And what happens if I stretch the tube? The diameter goes down. And that's going to create an increase in pressure. So the act of walking is the first piece that drives resorption of fluid, that drives flow of fluid from here and up. So it's called the venous plantar pump. You're creating a pumping mechanism simply by having normal gait. Well, why does this matter? Well, it impacts us when you have somebody who gets an anterior talofibular ankle sprain. You rupture that ligament. That ligament is part of that joint capsule. And so you rupture that joint capsule, and within 8 hours, that ankle is like a balloon. You're like, well, that's not so good. This person's like, help me. And they go to the ER. The ER is like, what are they going to do? It's not really a risk to life or limb. So they're not really going to, I don't want to say they're not really going to care, but it's really not going to be their forte. Your life and your limb is not at risk, and so they're going to refer you to orthopedic. You're going to get into it in a couple weeks. So what are they going to do in that meantime? Here's an air cast to immobilize it. Here's some crutches, stay off of it. So now we have gravity pulling fluid down. We are non-weight bearing and not moving that joint. So we are cutting out this entire venous plantar pump because we are not weight bearing. So all of that fluid that goes down stays down. And it adds to that swelling. Now our foot swells and our toes swells and life is not so good. And now the orthopedic sees it and is like, they do an x-ray. Yeah, it's just an ankle sprain, go see therapy, blah, 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 and you're going to take time to get it out. Their therapist's first approach is going to have to be to fix that swelling so you can get range of motion so we can actually start working on things. Because that swelling is a stagnant pool. It isn't fresh nutrients coming in. It isn't the healthy things we need to heal. So it's not adequate. It's not helpful. We need to help prevent that swelling.
That's the also possibility.
Maybe. So
Additional pressure on.
yeah, well, yes. The swelling does cause additional pain and pressure because it's stretching stuff out. And it's inflammatory based chemicals, which triggers pain.
Right.
So yes.
Well, pain also triggers neurochemical releases to dull pain. So in endorphin biofeedback loops, technically the pain, as long as it's not out of hand, is a beneficial thing to healing, isn't it? It brings awareness.
Endorphins aren't going to heal it though. So if it's not actively seeking to heal, and those endorphins are going to be more on the acute phase and not the chronic. So if you're looking at 2, 3, 4 days, if not 2, 3, 4 weeks post, and we're not getting that swelling and it's just cooling, then it's going to hurt when you use it because those inflammatory chemicals, the bradykinin, prostaglandins, are triggering that pain sensation that are very much separate from the acute response of endorphins.
Okay.
So endorphins, yes, on an acute, when they're released in response to a significant trauma, can help, but they wear off. They are very short-term things. So that means if I have an ankle sprain, what motion does the ATF restrict against? How do I stretch it? How do I put tension on it? How do I hurt it? What is it restricted against? Inversion with plantar flexion. How much inversion with plantar flexion do I have in the normal walking gait cycle? Stand up, feel it. Work it out. And you don't have to memorize everything. You get sometimes just to kind of work through problems. You're allowed to stand up during test. How much plantar flexion with inversion do we do in the process of a normal gait cycle? Virtually zero.
Yeah.
Like very subtle inversion as you're going through pronation, supination. But it's almost solely dorsiflexion up to that 20, going into almost a neutral with a little bit of push off and maybe 10 to 15 degrees of plantar flexion. Walking does not stress the ATF at all. So if you have an acute ATF sprain, yes, it's going to be a little uncomfortable. And if it's so uncomfortable that person can't bear weight, okay, have some crutches and get off of it. But then unload it and do partial weight bearing to be able to go through that process because it stresses that venous plantar pump. To have it there and to be using it, even if it's partial weight bearing, assists removal of that swelling. Is it better to have it up? Yes, if I can get off of it and let gravity pull that fluid down and out for me, and then add some exercises to make sure it's going through those one-way valves and not coming back. Brilliant. You want to give me a little bit of lymphedema. You want to give me a little bit of massage to help kind of work it out gently. To assist that, even better. You're going to be on it, you better be walking with a normal gait pattern, even if it's partially unloaded with crutches, because that's going to help mitigate the fact that gravity is pulling it down. Cool? So, venous plantar pump is helpful in pushing that up. Next piece I recently learned, because I've never actually thought of it this way, is that there's a muscle in here that's sometimes referred to as your second heart. So your soleus in here, with that sural vein running right up along it, is a lot of times references your second heart. So the process, again, of walking, of having that contraction of that soleus muscle is squishing that vein to further help the removal of that swelling. That's kind of cool. So that distal pump that we say, yes, muscles contract and they squeeze veins. Well, this one's significant enough that it's taking the blood flow out of your foot and the rest of your calf to make sure it's pumping up and out.
What is that vein?
It says small venous.
Oh, saphenous. There
Saphenous.
you go. Small saphenous.
Small stuff.
But we're not. I'm not getting into names of eggs. We'll do arterial branching, but that's for the sake of taking pulses. You don't need that later in life. But I'm not going to skip a big part of all that stuff.
That's the one we're taught to resect and insert IVs directly into. When you can't, like, so you have a patient who has no arms. They teach us how to essentially cut into the ankle, pull out the grave saphenous vein, insert an IV directly into it so we can get
That's cool.
it is like a lot of fun. It's cool. It's really cool.
All right. What's next? We're going to do dermatomes and myotomes for the lower extremity. Dermatomes and myotomes. So we're going to pull off that stuff. Go ahead. I just lost it to you. There we go. Get that. All right. So we're going to put on the scary yellow stuff. But that's not intimidating at all, is it? Through the vertebral frame and you have your spinal cord. At every level of a vertebra, you have specific branches that come out. And those specific branches have specific tasks. Some create activity by effectively acting on the rest of the world, and others are actually sensory information that effectively receive information from below. So dermatomes and myotomes is a balance of that. It's a conversation of that effect and effect. The myotomes is the branching of nerves that and the pathways that hit specific muscles to create motion. And the dermatomes is the pathway of sensory information that hits the skin or the cutaneous receptors or the mechanoreceptors tell joint position to give us information. So we can use those pathways to assess spinal integrity, nerve root integrity. Which lets us know the severity of some injuries. Right? So this isn't intended to test nerve branches later on. This is specifically to let us know how the spine is doing from those nerve branches, but it's done through sensory and movement patterns distant. Okay? So we're going to start with L1, which is the first lumbar vertebra. And we're going to go through S2. All right, so lower extremity, we're going to do L1. We're going to group L2, 3, and 4 together. We're going to do L5, S1, and then S2. So the patterning that you see in the different colorations correlates with, or we'll start with dermatomes. It'll be a pattern of the skin that innervates. So to create some reference points, if you find the ASIS, the point of your hip, where it crosses over the crease where you flex your hip, that band right across is going to be your L1. So pretty much connecting your ASIS under your belt line to your other ASI. L2, 3, and 4 are going to be the different levels going down your anterior thigh. So 2 is again up in the femoral triangle area. It's up in the area of that bend of your hip and just below. L3 is over the midsection. L4 then actually drops over your kneecap and goes over your medial calf. So you'll see posteriorly, medial calf right there, that medial aspect. But it doesn't cross your ankle, it doesn't go down into your foot. So 2, 3, and 4 as you work your way down, and 4 drops down into the medial calf. L5, and recognize it's all kind of diagonal patterning. So lateral knee down into big toe. And then S1 is toes 2, 3, and 4, or 3, 4, and 5. Sorry, 3, 4, and 5. And then it works its way back up about the midfoot. S1 further goes the lateral aspect of your posterior leg. And then S2 is the medial aspect of the posterior leg. S3, 4, and 5, they're there. But I would strongly encourage us not to be there. They get a little rougher. Pretty sure that's a handy way to do a lot soon. So, L1, again, across kind of ASIS and ASIS. L2, 3, and 4 is sensory on the skin. So what am I doing? I've got this person down on the ground that hit. They've had a collision of sorts, and I'm trying to say, can you feel this if I touch this area? And does it feel the same as the opposite side? So I can get a feel for, do I have a nerve root problem up at that level? So if I'm palpating down, and they can do 2, they can feel 3, they can feel 4, they can go through mid-calf, the medial aspect of the anterior calf, but they can't feel their pinky toe. And yeah, we're talking like we may very well have an S1 nerve root trauma. And so to manage that, it's not like I need to manage their big toe or their pinky toe. I need to stabilize their spine to make sure that we're not adding to this problem. So the assessment here is really that emergency side of how bad am I dealing with? Do I really suspect having an injury to the spine the potential nerve roots. So light touch is different from 2-point discrimination. So you can have
Yeah.
Where am I at you?
okay, so reflex hammers. You've seen before. These are fun ones, little wheels.
Hi.
Yeah. So it's kind of a sharp point as you kind of roll over. Can you feel this? It's going to create a pressure. The other end is a blade that you can put pressure on. The reason this is flared in many ways is because I can use the point or I can use the broad tip for light touch or for point pressure. And then these get really handy because if you unscrew the bottoms, then hiding inside I have a little brush for light touch. Can you feel this light touch? Or on the other side, if you just a light person. If you pull the top part out, you actually have a needle for the sake of fine point. Can you feel fine point discrimination? So all that tied into a reflex hammer, which is the third part of dermatomes, myotomes, and spinal systems. So dermatomes, the pathways, the skin sensation, we're doing light touch, deep pressure, and comparing bilateral. Myotomes is the muscles that these regions act on. The nerve roots then hit. So L1, and you can relate this to the area that they're there. So L1, again, crossing over this anterior thigh, right at the crest of the hip. We're going to do up, 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 down, down. So L1, you lift your knee, which is hip flexion. So you assess hip flexion, and we're assessing L1. L2, 3, and 4, again, they're grouped. And so the second up is if you lift your knee up, that's one. If you lift your foot up because you extend your knee, that's the second. That's your quadricep muscle group, right? The knee extension. So L1 is hip flexion, L2, 3, 4 is getting into knee extension. L5 conveniently goes over tibialis anterior compartment of the leg and into the big toe. So if you lift the foot, dorsiflex the foot, extend the big toe, that's L5. That's your third up. So hip flexion, knee extension, dorsiflexion. L1, L2, 3, 4, L5.
On your slide, it says
Knee flexion for what?
L4 for dorsiflexion and L5 for knee flexion.
That's awful. Okay, fix that. S1 goes over your Achilles. Your Achilles is plantar flexion. Easy enough. So that's your first down. Pointing your foot down, which is plantar flexion. And then S2 is going to be medial hamstring contraction. So it's going to be flexing your knee, pulling your knee back down. So that's your second down. So up, 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 down, down. L1, hip flexion. L2, knee extension. L2, 3, 4, knee extension. L5 gets into more of that dorsiflexion, knee toe extension. S1, plantar flexion. S2, hamstring, knee flexion, hamstring action. So last piece of this, and I'm going to find the reflex hammers because they're hiding, is why doctors whack you in the knee. So reflex hammers, there's a stretch response when I put a tension and pressure into that tendon that is going to trigger that muscle to fire to help protect it, which is directly related to that pathway through the spine. So it happens before you can even think about it because it's a spinal reflex. Reflex hammer, spinal reflex, brilliant. There isn't one for L1. L2, 3, 4 with the quads is pretty simple. That's your patellar tendon. That's where your doctor, that's the most common one when you get whacked in the knee to make sure you have a reflex. You'll get into a lot of this more and dig into it a bit more eval. I just think that initial exposure to it is beneficial. S1 is Achilles tendon. So have the person lying on the table with their foot hanging off, and then you can whack the Achilles and try to do a little bit of reflexive plank reflection. And then S2, depending upon the resource, you can get potentially a reflex out of semitendinosus, out of your medial hamstring muscles. You're not going to see full joint reflex. You're going to see more just a twitch within the muscle, which is a response to contraction. And as far as this exam goes, that's as much abuse as I'll put.
That's pretty easy.
I can have hip in there.
No, that's okay.
We're not down with the lower extremity yet.
That would make the test
I don't think these were the ones.
Dermatomes and myotomes
They're on the
were,
left.
they're either in the very, very end or they're stuck in with
I'm talking about one of
It's
the-
with- Yeah.
What was that?
ankle.
It wasn't on your first test.
I know.
I mean, it's a spinal concept that is done through the lower extremity, so gotta word out one second. So,
So myotomes create motion, which is sensory.
myo is muscle.
Right.
Right, derma is
So like
skin.
a mechanical reaction. And then the derma is basically a sensory pathway.
Yes. So efferent is
Efferent.
action pathway. That
Right, like the parent.
Effecting change is affecting the world. Affective is sensory emotion, is responsiveness to the world, sensing the world. And then DTR, deep tendon reflexes.
Yeah.
Patellar tendon, patellar tendon for L3, L4, Achilles tendon for S1,
I got that.
and then maybe S2 with medial.
You said L1 doesn't have one.
L1 does not have one. So 2, 3, 4 is patellar tendon.
Right.
S1 is Achilles tendon.
Achilles tendon and S2 is semitendinosus. It's a response to contraction. And that's DTR.
Yep, deep tendon reflexes. So dermatomes, myotomes, deep tendon reflexes are the spinal assessments. Not gonna go whack somebody with a hammer, but they could go spinal.
Yeah.
All right, so Friday. So you go to chat with Mrs. Gomero to kind of clarify what she can park it up for you. So you're covered. Studying, it's about production. It's about having that conversation. I would start layer by layer by layer. Every single piece I try to be consistent about. We talk about the bones that define the joint. So with that geometry in it, what kind of joint is it? Hinge joint, ball and socket. So there's 6 synovial joints. What type is it? Because that's going to give us a conversation about the degrees of freedom. So what motions are possible? What ligaments then restrict those motions? I draw it one color and I label the heck out of it for osteoarthritis. Cross-check that with your list and identify those holes. Your biggest piece is figuring out what you don't know so you can focus on what to hammer on to dial in. When you get osteo landmarks in, then go back and grab a different color, redraw, and add it in your ligaments. Emotions they restrict. I wouldn't get too specific about points of attachment. I know where they are, but I wouldn't worry so much about attachment points. We don't use origin insertion quite so much with ligaments, more so with muscles.